How's it going, everybody? Welcome to part 2 of my Santa Claus platformer tutorial for Unity. When we left off last time, we had a character where we can run and jump. And obviously, to make an interesting game, you would need a little bit more ability. So for this video, we are going to add a dashing ability as well as a butt slam. With these two new abilities, we should have a little bit more interesting gameplay mechanics that's a little bit different than your typical run and jump and stomp on enemies. You would use the dash and the butt stomp to destroy platforms, and later on we will defeat enemies with it as well. So let's get coding.
To start with the dashing, as always, we start with a header for our variables. Let's call this dashing. We'll also have a variable can-dash as a way to check that the player can indeed dash, which we didn't actually need to serialize, but the code has already been written and mistakes were made. We also need a dash speed, which we'll set to 20. We'll also create a dash time to determine how long the dash will be. For now, it will be 0.1. We'll add a boolean to check if we are dashing called isDashing, and we'll set to false. Finally, we need to capture the direction as a float. I'll leave a note here to remember 1 is towards the right and -1 is towards the left. But in order to capture the direction, we will use the horizontal tilt in our update. If horizontal tilt is greater than 0, then the current direction is equal to 1, which is to the right. And conversely, if horizontal tilt is less than 0, then current direction is -1, which is to the left. Next, we'll write a function to initiate the dash. We'll call it startDash. The logic will be quite simple since we'll control it by Boolean states. First, we check if we can dash. Next, we make sure we can't dash more than once by setting can dash to false. Then we set isDashing to true. Next, we will call a coroutine to count down the time for the dash and then disable it. Now let's write it out. If not can dash, return. Can dash equals false. IsDashing equals true. Start coroutine, time dash. We haven't written this function yet, but we'll do that next.
For those who aren't aware of what coroutines are, think of it as two people with different schedules. A program is like one person doing their own thing. When you add another coroutine, it's like adding another person, so you can have tasks running simultaneously along each other. A coroutine in C# and Unity requires a type of function that returns a IE numerator. It's a little bit complicated to get into, so we won't get into that for this video.
For the time dash coroutine, we'll create a function that returns that IE numerator. We'll have it stop for a brief moment with yield return new wait for seconds dash time, which is the time that we determined in the variables. After the time is up, we'll set isDashing to false. Let's go back to update movement. If the player is not dashing, we want all the previous movement to happen. So let's move all of this into that block. If we are dashing, we will create a new velocity on the rigid body, where the x speed is dash speed times the current direction. the y will be 0. For the input, I do want to make a few changes from last time.
In the last video, when I made the jump function, I used a spacebar instead of actually using button inputs from the input manager. In Unity, the input manager is a set of predefined buttons where you can configure, and you can just use keywords to call them out. When I was using get key down, I was directly asking for Unity to look for a specific key on the keyboard. To stay consistent, I want to use the input manager to control all inputs. That includes movements and for all the actions.
To find the input manager, in the Unity editor, we go to Edit, Project Settings, and look for the input settings on the left. We will be able to see a list of all the predefined inputs and the names we can use to call them. For jump, we can see that it also uses space for input. For the dash, we'll use Fire 1, which is left control and left click. Going back to our code, we can change our input to get button down, and we'll use jump. For the cancel, we'll copy this and change it to get button up. Lastly, for the dash, we'll copy this again, change the string to Fire 1, and have that call start dash. To make sure our dash input works, we'll go to our check ground and add if we are not dashing and are on the ground. Then can dash equals true. When we hit play, we can hit the left control or left click and our dash works. And in the inspector, we can adjust the speed or the time of the dash, just like we can with the speed of the player.
So we want the dash and the butt slam later on to be able to destroy objects, but not the ground. In the previous video, we created a new layer to help detect the ground. So now we also want to define a new layer that will define whether an object is destructible or not. And to do that, we'll also need to use a collision event, which basically means if two objects with a collider are interacting with each other.
So the first thing we need is that we want that new layer for the destructible objects. So we'll create a new layer mask variable called destructible layer. For the collider event, we'll use a predefined Unity function called onCollisionEnterToD that takes a value collision2D collision, which is just the object the player is colliding with. We will check if that collided object's game object layer is the destructible layer we'll create later, with layerMask.nameToLayer destructible. And is dashing to make sure that we are dashing.
Previously, we defined the destructible layer variable, but the collision event doesn't quite like that variable. So I tried to use the variable and it didn't really like that. And this workaround was the only way I can get it working.
We will try to destroy the object with a new function. That function is private void try destroy platform, and will take a game object G. In this function, we might play some animation just before destroying it. But since we don't have any animations yet, we'll just destroy G. Then back in onCollisionEnterToD, we'll call the function and pass the game object. This new layer is different from the ground layer, but we should still treat it like the ground and be able to jump on it. So we'll add to our detection by copying this and changing the layer to destructible layer. Back in the editor, we'll make a new 2D object, sprite square. We will then adjust the color slightly so we can recognize the destructible object. Next, we will create a new layer in the dropdown and call it destructible. We will rename the object as well and assign the new layer. Let's also add a box collider 2D. Back in our player object, we want to assign the layer to a destructible layer variable. Now we should be able to jump on the new object, as well as dash to destroy it.
For the butt slam, we wanted an ability to have the player slam directly downwards. When it hits the ground, it will stop. But if it hits a destructible layer, it'll destroy that object. And like the dash, we shouldn't have control over the player when we're performing the butt slam. We'll have to wait until the player hits the floor.
For the butt slam, we'll create a header as usual. We will need a float slam speed, which will be -20, since it needs to move downwards. We also need a bool is slamming, which will start as false. Now let's create the function start slam. This will be simpler than the dash, since we don't need coroutines. We first check if we're on the ground. Then set is slamming to true. If we are dashing, we will cancel it. And these are quite literal. If on ground, return. Is slamming equals true. Is dashing equals false. In our update movement, we will add a new condition for is slamming. And we'll do the same as the dash. The X is 0, but the Y will be slam speed. We want the slam to destroy things as well, but we will do this in the check ground function instead. If the player is performing a butt slam, check if the objects below are destructible with raycasts. So, if is slamming, we'll then copy the raycast line. But we also want to assign the ray hits to the objects. We'll create a variable raycastHit2D called X. And we'll paste the above line. We'll copy this and do it for the left side as well. We change X to Y and the plus to minus. Now if X is a successful hit, we will try destroy platform x.transform.gameObject. Let's do this for the Y as well. Next, if we are on the ground, we will stop the butt slam. On the inputs, To get this to activate, we'll use fire 2. And call our start slam function. When we hit play, we can hit the left alt or right click, and we slam and destroy the destructible objects. We can also combine the dash and slam for some interesting movements.
And there you have it. Our platformer has 2 new abilities, a dash and a butt slam. And that ends part 2 of our 6 video series. How'd you guys do? Do you have any questions, comments, concerns? Feel free to leave it in the comments below. And if you like what you saw, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe below. This channel's brand new, so any support I can get would be greatly appreciated. And with that, I'll see you in the next one.